Ni No Kuni has been on my radar since it originally released back in 2013 for the PS3. I mean, a Pokemon-esque RPG with designs and animated cutscenes from Studio Ghibli? Sign me up! However, one thing or another kept me from actually buying the game, and now it's 2020, and it's out for the Nintendo Switch, so I finally picked it up at the shockingly reasonable price of $25. So how does this game hold up? Let's talk about it. As expected, with Studio Ghibli helping out, the game's world building is incredible. Cutscenes play out both in-game and as hand-animated scenes with all the style and charm that you'd expect from Studio Ghibli. In the story, you quickly learn that a second world exists, much different from our own. Here, creatures and fairies exist, as well as powerful evil dark djinns and good sages. In each world, every character has a soulmate that links them to the other world. And that is how Oliver plans to bring back his recently deceased mother, as she passes away at the beginning of the story. And he'll also save the world, of course. I mean, it is still an RPG. But I was immediately hooked and invested in Oliver's tragic beginnings and the imaginative world crafted by the game. It's nice that Oliver has motivation that is personal to him. It doesn't feel like he's being forced by whatever to be the savior of the world. He is acting in his own interest initially. But over the course of the game, he grows into that role of saving the whole world. It's well set up, and it allows for really natural character growth, and I really enjoyed that about the game. Now, of course, the drive of the main game's antagonist is to destroy the world, and he does that by breaking the hearts of its inhabitants. It's a slight twist on the idea of Kingdom Hearts' Heartless, where broken-hearted people become shells of themselves, unable to function and content to let life pass them by. Oliver has the power to take pieces of heart from people with excess amounts of courage, joy, love, and the like, and give them to these people to return them to their old selves. It's a cool little mechanic. That said, it does reduce a majority of the side quests to scavenger hunts within the world's towns and cities. Most of them are, this person is brokenhearted in some way, go find somebody who has the missing piece and bring it back. The world itself is also filled with familiars, which is Ni No Kuni's version of Pokemon. Initially, Oliver is only given one. However, early on in the game, you meet a second party member that is able to capture wild ones that you can use as well. Now, unlike Pokemon, you can't just capture any familiar that you see. First, you have to knock it out, and then, if you're lucky, it will become serenadable. After this, you have a limited amount of time to switch to Esther, the second character, and use the command, which luckily has a 100% success rate. It's a little more streamlined than Pokemon in that sense. However, I was frustrated by the very low rate at which familiars could be caught. This took away any of the gotta catch 'em all drive that I might have had, which I admit is minimal to begin with. An RPG can have an engaging world and story, and this game definitely does, but personally I believe that the battle system is what makes or breaks an RPG game, since that's what you spend a majority of your time doing. Now, I don't need anything super complex. For reference, Final Fantasy X is my favorite game of all time, and that has a relatively simple turn-based combat system. I just need something that makes me feel in control and able to handle the situation that I'm put into. The system itself in Ni No Kuni is fine, and actually has a lot of pieces that could have been very great. You have basic attack and defend commands, and then a select number of abilities that your familiars learn over time. You can directly control any of your party characters or their familiars at any time, and the combat even pauses while you do this switch to help things from getting too hectic. It's a pretty solid take on real-time, but also turn-based combat. You can freely move around the battlefield to avoid enemies. However, once you select an action for your character to do, they control themselves for its duration. Now, this can occasionally go wrong, especially with the standard attack option, because the autopathing in this game is atrocious. It was very common that my familiar would get stuck out of range, whether it be on another teammate of mine or a different enemy, or sometimes just kind of standing there idly waiting to attack. Now, admittedly, that's a small complaint, and you can avoid that fairly easily as you can move before you use the attack. And really, the game's combat is very satisfying when it works. While you control one character, the AI controls the other two. And this is where the game falls into borderline unplayable territory. Ni No Kuni actually presents an interesting balance between abilities and standard attacks. With high MP costs relative to your total pool, you need to know when to use abilities and when to hold off and simply beat your foes to death with basic attacks. The AI, however, missed the memo. Yeah, we're gonna need to get them another copy of the memo. The AI will use any and every ability at any chance they get. Fighting a trash mob from the starting area while in the late game cleaning up side quests? Oh well, better use my strongest, most expensive ability, even though you could kill this thing with a single auto attack. This is especially frustrating during normal story progression, as when you actually need some MP to heal or exploit an enemy's weakness, you won't have it. You do not get this back at the end of fights, only at save points in dungeons, of which there's usually at most 2. So you really do need to manage your MP well, and this game does not let you. You can, of course, give the AI basic behavior settings like keep us healthy or give it your all, but honestly none seemed to change their behavior in any significant way. There is the don't use abilities setting, but then I found myself unable to react in time if I needed them to use their abilities. So this actually ends up making normal enemy encounters more difficult than boss fights, as a normal encounter usually consists of 3 or more enemies, and they can quickly focus down and overwhelm a member of your party. If you're not fast enough, they'll be able to get to the other 2 as well before you can really do anything about it. Healing takes time, using items takes time. So if you're not fast, you're dead. And that's frustrating. It led to a few game overs that felt completely unfair. This is of course then compounded by the lack of an autosave in the game, meaning you're sent back to your last save point. Now you can of course continue, but it costs you 10% of your money, and still sends you back to the location of the nearest save point in the dungeon, which usually forces you to again go through the same gauntlet of enemies that you already have to get back to where you were. Boss fights usually end up being a little more manageable, as they normally have clear attack patterns, and you don't really need to care about your other party members, because you won't be overwhelmed since it's a single enemy. To me, this is completely backwards to how an RPG should play out, and due to that unfair way that enemies can quickly outdamage your healing, especially if somebody's already fallen, it led to a lot of frustration during exploration, especially in the Yule area. Now, the game does add an extra level of stress to boss fights by throwing them at you completely out of nowhere, usually not in a time or place where you'd have recently saved. Yes, most dungeons have a save point right before a boss, but there's a number of boss encounters that happen after seemingly innocuous objectives in the story, such as go talk to this person, or restore this person's heart. Now luckily, because of how boss fights are in this game, it usually wasn't the end of the world, it wasn't a game-breaking complaint, but again it did cause some frustration, especially in the early game, when the fights were a little tougher, and the story beats leading to these boss fights were not as clear. After it happens 3 or 4 times, you do kind of get used to when this game is going to toss a boss at you and are able to save. Now, these issues with combat, AI, and boss fights really did sour the overall game experience for me. But I have to say, the narrative was still engaging enough that I wanted to play through to the end. There was a few times where I did have to step away from the game because I got really frustrated losing some time exploring, leveling, only to die before finding another save point. And the idea of, even with the continue option letting you save all that experience, going through that all again, we've all been there, you just don't want to do it. But I will say, no matter how many times I walked away, I always wanted to come back to this game. I wanted to see it through to the end. Leveling in this game can also be kind of slow, so you never really do get to that point of feeling over-leveled through the course of the game. You don't really need to grind much, though. In fact, outside of that Yule, the Ice Town, I would say the difficulty in this game is nearly perfect. But in that Yule area especially, there are some enemies where you can quickly and unexpectedly get overwhelmed and die. Now, the game does have a lot of side quests, as I mentioned earlier. That said, none of them grant experience on completion, and a majority of them don't require you to leave towns or engage in battles, meaning that there really aren't much of a source of leveling. Again, I liked this, and I think this feeds back into that sort of better balanced difficulty curve. You can do the side quests as you get them, and then not make the main quest irrelevant as far as difficulty goes. In the end, Ni No Kuni finds itself in an interesting place. It's a wonderful world with great music, colorful graphics, with an engaging story with likable and interesting characters. But it's soured by a frustrating AI that makes most combat feel like a slog. It doesn't make the game unplayable though, and like I said, I wanted to see this through. The story carries it, and when the battle system works, it actually works really well. They were really on to something with this system. It was more that the AI let it down, not the system itself. Because of all this, I'm giving the game a 4 out of 5. It's absolutely worth it at full price, which I think now is $20, maybe $30 on the Nintendo Switch. It looks great on the Switch. I can only imagine it looks better on other consoles, but it looks awesome on the Switch. I loved playing it in handheld and docked. Go pick this game up. If you like RPGs, you're gonna like this game. It is great, and all the good definitely outweighs the bad. So what do you think? Have you played Ni No Kuni? Do you like it? Is it one of your favorites? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment on what games you want me to review next, or what topics you want me to talk about. I'm thinking about doing some topical videos as well. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and give me a follow on Twitch, where I usually go to record the footage I collect for these games. And I'll see you guys next time.